We're back here on our program, The Platform, and it's an interesting program today because we're getting something of a history lesson on how at least one Bahamian family was adopted, the Enos family. Guthrie?
Yes, what I want to say is I want to express thanks to Dr. Tinker, Dr. Keith Tinker of the Monuments.
The Antiquities and Monuments.
Right.
Corporation.
He was instrumental in bringing Robert here for this visit, because I think Dr. Tinker teaches a course at the University of the Bahamas, and he brought Robert here as a guest lecturer. And the other person I'd like to thank is Mr. Kendall Butler, who initially made the contact with Robert, because Kendall is a local authority on local boat building. And I think he visited the museum where Robert was. And Robert mentioned his name, Enos, and Kendall said, well, I know some. And that's how we connected.
I see.
And that's when he was here the first time, I think in 2006.
Yes.
So those two gentlemen have been very instrumental in Robert's involvement with the Bahamas. And I think I persuaded him to turn over all his family artifacts to either the Pompeii Museum or to the Antiquities, because they are part of the Bahamian folklore and history.
Where would you have gotten the artifacts?
From my grandmother.
Okay.
And I have a model of it's a bark. It's a four-masted ship. It's square rigged on three masts, 4.5 on one. That Alfred Enos made in Key West when he was a young man. It's in a glass case about like that. I have William Sophius Enos's speaking trumpet. It's about that long. It's brass and copper. I have a fid that's made of lignum vitae, about that long, about that big around, for splicing ropes. And I have the family Bible that goes back to, the Bible itself is 1857 with William Sophius Enos's name bound on the edge of it with inserts that go back to 1787. How I got these out of all the other cousins, I don't really know, other than the fact that I paid quite a bit of attention to my grandmother and to my great-great-uncle. And they told me all these stories all the time. Now, I want to go back to what Godfrey said about how the connection started. And talking to Kendall, there's this man named Eric Sweeting, who's a white Bahamian. He was in St. Petersburg, and he was coming over to the archives to do research. And he was sitting down at a table asking about the Sweeting family, and Kendall was sitting there very quietly doing his research. And then he mentioned the boat building and this and that, and then I think he might even said something about an Enos. And Kendall perked his ears up, and they started talking. And what the gist of it was is what Eric Sweeting got hold of an article that was written about me in the St. Petersburg paper, and he gave that to Kendall. And it talked about my Bahamian boat building heritage. And so Kendall calls me out of the blue one day when I'm getting ready for a festival out there and starts talking to me. And that was the beginning of it.
That's interesting.
And we've been he asked if he's doing his book on the boat builders, and he said that he has Anthony in there, he has William in there, and he has Alfred in there. Says, can I verify these dates? I said, I can. I have the family Bible with all their births and deaths in it. He says, can you get me a copy? I said, I can bring it over. And so I have this little Amelia Earhart small suitcase that the Bible just fit in, and I carried it over here against the wishes of my sister and my cousin, because they said, you're not taking that Bible anywhere. I said, but I am. It sits in my house, which is built out of wood. It could burn at any moment, and no one has ever had any interest in this document till this point. We owe it to other people to share this.
And
So I came over, and he introduced me to all my other cousins, and even, is it your aunt whose name is Naomi?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was my grandmother's name. So it's things just aren't that very far apart.
And you have the temerity and the audacity to say you own him as a cousin.
No. I don't. I can't even take care of
own that
myself.
man?
I can't even take care of myself, let alone other people.
So you've met, the Enos clan is a very small clan, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very small.
Yes.
I took him in Baintown to meet some of the cousins in Baintown. he met some of them before. So, you know,
You had to, did you go back to Harbor Island?
I did. I went back to Harbor Island about 15 years ago. And I was on the island for about 15 minutes with my wife, and everyone knew who I was and what I was doing there.
Is that right?
And
Did you feel a spiritual connection?
I was born and raised in Florida, so I'm used to the wide open, views of the ocean and all that. And it's other than it's like it would have been there in the 1920s or something. It's not that much different. It's like home. You all have good fish dinners. We have good fish dinners. We enjoy the same kind of things.
You know, on the Pitt side, he also has a rather illustrious connection to William Pitt, who was the prime minister the youngest prime minister of Britain during the time of the abolition and the emancipation era. You know, because that Pitt interfaced with Wilberforce, who was in the British Parliament.
Right.
And I think they have been doing some research on that aspect of their family connections. And actually, in Harbor Island, there's a street called Pitt Street. I understand there's one called Indian Street too? Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Harbor Island.
There's an Enia Street?
In Harbor Island, yeah.
In Harbor Island?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Pitt then, you're on your father's side.
Yes.
Is British?
Yes. Originally it was Italian, was Pitti, P-I-T-T-I, and then somewhere along the line they went to England, the I got dropped, and my father's father, Gerard Pitt, was an architect in Miami. He hired and worked on chasing the lineage back as far as he could to actually touch William Pitt. And it gets back to a courthouse in Thetford, England, which burned. And that's where the final documents, but I believe that we are related to the William Pitt the Younger's brother. I don't think that William Pitt had any offspring, any children.
Yeah. And where do you live in Florida?
I live on the Gulf Coast of Florida, just off the Manatee River near Tampa.
Near Tampa?
It's called Bradenton.
Okay. It's a good distance away from
It is.
Miami.
Yes, it is, Miami. That's the way my grandmother always pronounced it.
And you continue to pronounce
I
it
do.
Miami today.
Yes.
But also he says that there's an Indian Street in Key West.
Yes, Eneas Lane. It's about 2 blocks long, and there's no sign on it, or I would have taken it.
Bahamians really got Key West started, didn't
They were a great influence on it. Yes,
Yes.
And it was the Cubans and the Bahamians. The Cubans were more of the merchant type, and the Bahamians were the boat people. They built the boats, they ran the boats, they moved the cargo around. They were the fishermen. Yes, they were. But it was, and Key West at one time was the richest city per capita in the United States in the 1800s, with no road to it.
with no river.
Yes, and one of the prime Bahamians in Key West was the Curry family.
Right.
And the Currys became Florida's first millionaires. William Curry did. And when he got all his money, he went to Tiffany's in New York and had, I believe it was a 15-piece gold service made. And it was sitting in the window of Tiffany's. And John Jacob Astor came by and looked at that and says, I want it. And they said, I'm sorry, you can have the next one. This is already sold to a man named Curry. And they said, I've never heard of a man named Curry. But it came down to Key West. And my grandmother grew up with the Currys and the Fogartys.
And those Currys probably came out of
They did.
out of
Green turtle.
Eleuthera somewhere.
Green Turtle.
Or Green Turtle Key, Abaco.
Yes.
Interesting. And there's still Currys
And there's Currys up in my area too. They settled Curry Point,
Okay.
which is now called Point Pleasant, but it originally was from one of the Currys. There was John Curry. He got there in 1859, I believe.
You're a tremendous historian. Now, Bahamians also settled in South Carolina.
Yes, been from the
Because
Carolinas.
there are many streets in South Carolina that are named like our streets here in
Charlotte
Providence,
Street and
Charlotte
things.
Street
Yeah.
and
Yes.
Nassau
Market
Street
Street
and
and-
Market Street
Yeah,
and places such.
Yeah.
Do you know much about the settlement of Bahamians in Carolina?
I don't. I've never spent more than 2 weeks at one time outside of Sarasota, Manatee, Monroe, or Dade County. I'm a Florida boy, and I don't venture far from home. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, being a boatman, I thought you would venture, you would have traveled the entire Bahamas.
No, well, it's kind of a curse. I've ended up to be more of, as a wife of a friend of mine said, he's more of a nailer than a sailor. I build more than I boat.
I see, I see.
And that's what I do as a living, and that's what I do for a hobby. I have my little history thing I do. I fix our houses. I still travel a little bit and display our local Florida boats. We just went to St. Michael's, Maryland. They have a Mid-Atlantic Small Craft Festival. I think they're on the 35th one. It's the premier small craft event on the east coast of the United States. And we won second place for just a Florida pole skiff. It's a mullet fishing boat. It's of a 1950 vintage. It was nothing fancy, but we had the documentation to show how important it was to our culture.
Robert,
Yes.
we are grappling with these colossal hurricanes,
Yes.
this region, right?
Yes.
And in the old days, Bahamians built houses that withstood
Yes.
hurricane. They couldn't so much deal with flooding and sea surge,
Yes.
but at least
To keep the structures
right.
together.
Speak to that.
Well, I can't really speak to how it was done in Bahamian, but in the Florida Keys and Florida, which it's so similar. I haven't spent that much time here, but I spent a lot of time around old homes in Florida. Actually, we own the first church built in Fogartyville, which is a little settlement I live in. It was built in 1885, and it was built by a bunch of Key West conchs, the Fogarty family. And so what they did was they built boats like they built houses. Built houses like they build boats. They peg them together. They use green yellow pine, which is hard as rock, but when it's green, you can nail it. And then once it dries, you can't unnail it. The wood was such higher quality then than it is now that my house I live in was built in 1933. They used 2x4s to span it. To build it today, you have to use 2x8 or 2x6 or 2x8 to get the same strength. So it's the materials and the construction.
And it's built out of pine.
Pine, yes.
What about these gable?
Well, the hip roofs are the most survive the most because they have no end to press on. It's less to paint, but it is a roof surface. But there's been a lot of failures in South Florida with the gable ends pushing in, and just collapsing the whole roof because of the way they're built. They're built with trusses and they're built with plywood. And then once they start to move a little bit, there's no diagonal strength to it, and they just fold it all over like that. So it's the plywood. So if it was built out of solid wood, it probably wouldn't do that so much.
You ever heard about the Abaco pine?
I have. Both Caribbean pine is the same. It's the same as our southern yellow pine, pretty much.
Okay.
Ryan Homestead, you mean?
Yes, yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pinus Caribbean, that's what we have
Yes.
in the Bahamas.
And I forget the actual technical name of it, but I did some research after working with Weiner Malone, who built my little Abaco dinghy in 1976, I think. And it was planked with yellow pine, Caribbean pine. And talking to Weiner, he said that now he has to put wood preservatives on it, which basically replaces what they distilled out of the pine tree to begin with. Because they tap it for all the oils and stuff now, and they grow it so quickly, you have to put it back into it. And he is, the last couple of boats he was building also out of cypress. The cypress we get in Florida comes out of Florida, and we can buy very wide boards, very long boards, relatively inexpensive. It does gain 3 times its weight in water though, so it gets kind of waterlogged. But if it's not a boat you're moving on off the beach, you don't really care.
You tell an interesting story, and we can keep you here all day. But I thank Mr. Godfrey Enyas for bringing you along. And it is good that you would come back to the Bahamas and connect with the Enyases and to teach them a little bit about their history.
Yes, yeah.
And I learn myself also. I learn every time.
Yes, I appreciate your coming here today. Thank you so
thank
very
you.
much. Thank you, Godfrey.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to our program with Mr. Robert Pitt today, who traces his ancestry back to the Enyases of Harbor Island. Good evening, everyone.